Ladies and gentlemen, Variety welcomes you to Purpose, the Family Entertainment and Faith-Based Summit, in association with Rogers & Cowan. Please welcome a spotlight conversation on Persecuted, moderated by Gretchen Carlson, Fox News Channel host and actor in Persecuted.
Thank you so much. I am Gretchen Carlson, and I host The Real Story on the Fox News Channel. I did host Fox and Friends on the Fox News Channel for 7 years prior to that. And I do have to chuckle a little bit when I hear an introduction also including actor, because being a part of Persecuted was my first time being in a film, and it was an amazing experience. I always like to take on new challenges, and I was just blessed to have that opportunity. To speak to you today and introduce you to the actors and the people behind this film. You know, I really feel like this is central to my life to be at this summit today, because it's about faith and family. I grew up in Minnesota. My grandfather was a minister, and so faith has always been a big part of my life. Family, tight-knit family from Minnesota, and I'm a mom, too, of 2 small children as well. And this film really embodies many of the things and issues that we're talking about in society today with regard to First Amendment rights and faith and the freedom of having your faith. So without further ado, and I do want to mention as well, if you have questions, we're going to open it up to the audience a little bit later on, so keep that in mind. I want to introduce you to the esteemed colleagues of mine who are on the panel with me today. I'm going to start at the end with Gray Frederickson. You know him from Apocalypse Now and The Godfather, and an Oscar winner.
And Persecuted.
And Persecuted, of course. And we have Brad Stine, who used to be on Fox and Friends with me all the time.
What happened?
Well, I left the show and I'm doing my own show now.
Still waiting for my residuals on that. I don't know what...
Well, you can come on The Real Story now. Of course, he's known as God's comic, and he's also an actor, all-around great guy. And here's a man with many titles. We have Senator Fred Thompson, former presidential candidate, of course, longtime actor as well. He's got a long list of achievements, and it was my honor to be in this film with Mr. Fred Thompson. And none of us would be sitting here if it wasn't for Daniel Lusko. He was the writer, the producer, the director, the every guy on this film, and it really was his inspiration. I believe it came to you in a dream, this entire movie script, and he woke up the next morning and said, I have a film. Daniel Lusko. And I want to start with Daniel as we moderate this session to tell us what came to him in that dream and how it ended up as Persecuted.
Well, I should probably start by saying, you know, I grew up in a pastor's home. I'm a pastor's kid, and so I knew that world, large churches, and so I wanted to bring something cinematic to screen that had of those compelling cinematic elements, but a world I knew. And like you said, I was inspired by God. It sounds really strange, but it's true. I woke up one morning, and the basic nuts and bolts of the story was there. And it was about an evangelist, a world-renowned Billy Graham type evangelist who was uncompromising in his beliefs about the gospel. And he stood up against a senator, a former close colleague, who wanted to impose this restrictive legislation about what could and couldn't be said in the interest of national security, and that kind of religions would have to get along, and that would be mandated. And in choosing to go against that and persist in his kind of one-way beliefs, he loses everything, and he goes on the run. And I just saw this image of a man running through the forest for his life, for his beliefs, for his values, and that was 5 years ago. And a lot of people have asked me, you know, so there's a lot of things happening in the news, and so did you develop this story around that? I get asked that by Larry King just recently, you know, what was driving you? Is it some political agenda? And really, it's not. It's a man standing uncompromising. He could have been an executive of a large company. He could have been somebody else, but he was a man standing up for his values. And that story I just continued to refine, and it was a real challenge to get it made. Finally, fast forward 5 years now, and this last year or so, all of the timely events that have caught up to these questions of First Amendment rights and things in the media have kind of brought it to a larger value and a larger relevance to our audiences and to families who care about these core beliefs, and you know, it's just expanded from there. And so it's just further been confirmation to me that it was important to pursue in the first place.
Fred Thompson, you of course play a priest in the movie. Is this the first time you've ever played a priest?
Typecasting.
Typecast.
Threw it on its head.
What I've always wanted to ask you, though, is, so the main character in the film, James Remar, is your son. How'd that happen if you're a priest?
Ask Daniel.
Shady business. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. It's a joke. Before he was a priest. Anyway, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah. Before I was a priest, yeah.
Okay, so that's the short
I was
answer.
Saul before I was Paul.
Well, why did you want to be a part? Why? He knows his Bible. Why did you want to be a part of this particular film?
Well, it's a good film. It's a good film. And it's a film that I'd be happy to have every member of my family to see, including my grandchildren. It's that simple. That simple. And it was especially interesting to me. I think we all come from our different vantage points, and I concur in everything Daniel just said. But for me, there's this church versus state element, church-state element. There's a governmental power element to this thing that especially I thought, you know, was interesting, considering my background and concerns in those areas. And although you know, you can't necessarily make a movie about something that's occurring today or even extremely likely to occur. But anytime you have the power of the federal government involved, you have to watch it closely. And the potential there is to do good, but it's also there, potential is there to do evil. And there are a lot of moving parts. Here we're talking about a United States senator and a president. In this movie, but one man standing up to that and to them, from a personal standpoint, was an intriguing thing. A person who had been down and came back, and was strong enough to stand there. So that appealed to me.
And you were anxious to wear a collar.
Yeah. You know, a poor guy out on the street mistook me for the real thing, and as I was walking, I didn't realize it until after he had passed me on by. You know, he tried to come up to me, and I was walking by. So you got to be careful when you're wearing those collars.
And I wanted to say something briefly about Fred that was kind of throwing the cliches on its head. He's a more presidential candidate, a U.S. senator, and yet the priest in this story is kind of a conspiracy theorist, or he's kind of been watching all of these operations going on and so on. It was amazing to have someone like Fred who understand this playing the opposite role, because we would have these conversations on set, and I remember we got at that cabin in the woods, and he was supposed to have this scene with James Remar where he's relaying what's going on with this legislation and what's really behind it, and he's really the mentor, a classic archetype mentor to the protagonist in the movie. But Fred wanted to challenge me, and he asked tons of questions about what the legislation is, what's really behind it, how does it work, and so his understanding of the political arena brought a huge validation, I think, to this movie, because as an independent film, handling these heavy-handed themes like legislation and politics and world-renowned evangelists and nationally, you know, all this stuff is really a big challenge, but having someone like you kind of come behind it and test it, I think brought a lot more certainty to that scene. It's one of people's favorite scenes that I know.
Well, thank you. You know, your instinct was right about not getting bogged down into a lot of detail. And that's the last kind of detail that you want to get bogged down into. But enough to show how it motivated other people to do
it's a credible threat, yeah.
Right. So let me bring in Gray Frederickson to the discussion, because I know that you saw this script and there was something about it that you wanted to be involved. What was it?
Well, basically, I'm just kind of an old production producer, right? And in the movie business, we're storytellers. And if I see a story that gets me, I like it. And I don't think, does it have a message or is it saying something special? I see the story and I like the story. And I liked the story, and I met Daniel and I liked it. And then I started to see, wow, there's some underlying important messages in this movie. And that is a little the icing on the cake for me. But I think the movie is a thriller. It's excellently produced, and it's fun to watch. It's entertaining. That's my side of the business.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because it is a faith film, Brad, but it's also a mainstream film.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a fine line of distinction between those two things. Or is there now?
Well, I think Bruce Davison, who's also Academy Award nominated actor, who's also a big part in this, said it best. It's a hybrid. And this isn't necessarily a religious man, but he saw a film that had great storytelling, suspense thriller. You don't normally associate faith films with suspense thriller. Not a lot of gunplay. And suddenly we're...
PG-13.
What's that?
PG-13.
PG-13, that's right. And yet, it talked about things that matter in America as well. I mean, to me, the great thing that I've tried to do as a comedian over the years, and now that I'm moving into acting and these other things, is telling God's story, but through compelling, wonderful art. We should be the people making the best art. Hollywood should come to us and say, how do you do it that good? We should be setting the standards, because we have the ultimate story. We have the ultimate storyteller, and that's what I wanted. For me to be part of this was so exciting. We worked with a guy that made the Godfather, worked with a guy that was a priest and immaculately conceived his son somehow. And, you know, and Daniel, which I had done stuff for, and he's the up-and-coming new director. This was exciting. And with you, because we had done Fox and Friends, and suddenly you're on a movie set in New Mexico. And it was exciting. And we all know that something is happening in faith films. This year has been the watershed, but
Totally.
This is changing. This is a game changer, Persecuted, because there's never been anything like this, and it's going to start setting the bar for what we can expect to make as Christians and filmmakers,
Well,
and that is exciting.
Daniel, why is Persecuted being given so much attention?
Well, I want to give definitely credit to the other movies that have been successful this year that have certainly helped, you know, like Heaven is for Real and God's Not Dead and all these other movies that really, I think, have been a powerful movement for the film. And I think it's opened a lot of doors and given audiences, faith audiences, a lot of hope that there is more on the way. And I think that's a huge help. But I think there's a lot of concern, too, about our values being at stake here in America. And I think there's, for a long time at least, maybe not this year so much because things I think are changing. I think there's a huge work going on, but those things, the family unit in general across America, gosh, it's just been undermined, I feel like, and I think that if it can't make its way out in the political arena, the truth and these values that we hold dear in the faith world, they're going to make their way out some way because I think God wants and the truth to come out, and it's going to be voted on at the box office, and I think that's changing everything.
But the level of release, you know, it's really interesting because you call it an independent film, but the level of release is high.
We're really grateful. We're going to be releasing on 600 theaters across the country on July 18th, and we've gotten thank you. It's been, I mean, it's been a huge challenge. We face a lot of opposition, and you know, we're really grateful to include Regal and Cinemark and AMC. We screened it at their headquarters.
We're going to be there for every one of those openings.
That's right. I mean, I think the senior vice president, one of the head people at Regal, watched the movie with me, and he looked at it and he said, that's a lot more than a faith-based movie, you know, and that was probably one of the best things because he didn't have to say anything like that, and he said, we're going to give this thing every bit of release we can. And I think without those types of commitments, an independent film without a studio or a major distribution company who has tons of movies going through, you know, it'd be really hard to get what we've gotten.
So, Gray Frederickson, you had so much experience in the mainstream field genre. Do audiences today expect more from a faith-based film?
Well, I sort of started with, well, I started making little Italian movies, but I worked most of the time in, I did.
Tiny, which one for those? No, I'm just kidding.
Good, the Bad, the Ugly. That was a fun movie.
Oh, yeah.
So I spent many years doing studio pictures. It's easy. I mean, it's not easy. Nothing's easy. But they do everything for you. And then all of a sudden, I started getting into independent films. And the things you never thought of, all of a sudden, I mean, delivery requirements. I don't know if anybody have had to deal with that. It's mind-blowing.
Long list.
Yeah, everything. And so the first few little independent movies we tried to make, no one paid any attention to them. And so the fact that this movie, people are paying attention to it and getting a theatrical release, which is also a major accomplishment for an independent movie, and on 600 screens, it says something about where our country is heading. And I think, as we were talking at breakfast, I think it's a pendulum. I think it's swinging the other way now. I think people they want more morality. They want better things happening. And I live in Oklahoma now. And that's where the country's, I mean, that's a major part of the country. And they all kind of believe like I do, and I think all of us do, that we want to see things our kids can watch and teach them lessons and feel good and do the right thing. And that's why I think I'm glad they're doing this. This is wonderful to see something like this happening in Hollywood, where I lived, by the way, for 40 years I lived here.
So Brad, why don't you expound upon that with regard to the relevance of the issues that are at play in this film, and how many people believe that those are the struggles that we're actually encountering in today's society, meaning many Christians do feel like they're persecuted. We certainly know that's happening around the world, but even right here in America.
Right.
And First Amendment rights as well. Is that one of the reasons why this film is taking off like it is?
Of course, because that's the thing, it's dangerous. You don't think of faith films as being dangerous. This is dangerous. Why? Because it's talking about real issues. I mean, this is what we should be doing. The point of Christ was to redeem culture. That's why he existed. That's why he came to earth. He said, I'm going to fix what was broken. And now the way that this is being done is through films. We don't have to tell you guys. That's what we do. The biggest influencer in America is not politicians. It is not theologians. It's television. It's motion picture. This is the way that we are changing our culture. And so when there are Christians who realize that liberties are at stake, which was on your show when I would be on Fox and Friends, they brought me on to, slam political correctness and all the stuff I did. But I was given that opportunity by your producer who unsolicited came out and sought me out. And I said, God, I didn't ask for this. This is something a publicist would have begged. And this guy just handed me this. I believe you've put me here, so I'm going to say whatever. I don't care if they get rid of me. I don't care if they fire me. I'm going to stand up for your story, for your truths, because this is my opportunity to say, this is who we are. We're not going to be silenced. We're not going to be, doormats anymore. And this is so crucial to believers in this town, that we take care of each other, that we are hiring each other, not just because you're a Christian. You got to have the goods. But if we're not taking care of each other, shame on us. Because we need that networking. We need that opportunity to tell God's stories. We are watching our rights being limited. It's happening for real. It's not a political right-wing rhetoric. It's really happening. And so if we can tell a story in a fictional form, but it deals with truth, and it's suspenseful, and it's great actors, and yet it's dealing with an idea without beating them over the head with a Bible, it's one man's persecuted story, but it relates to everybody. That's why we brought Jay Sekula from the ACLJ on. He's dealing with real persecuted Christians around the world. This is real relevant. Let's bring him in. This was part of our marketing ideas, is let's bring in where the real people who are dealing with real issues can be part of a film and give it this extra credibility. Like I said, this is groundbreaking. Like you said, all the films that have come out this year, God bless them. They're telling the story. People are seeing it, and God's name is being proclaimed. But we also want to break some ground, too. We also want to find new ways and new storytelling that goes to different levels, I think, and this is important.
Well, and I think these other movies that have come out are breaking ground. I think this is a different and has a greater challenge for us in particular because, there's a saying by Robert McKee, I think, without conflict you can't have story, and this movie deals with high themes of conflict, and that was something that was really important. It's built on a classic 3-act structure with classic archetypes and high conflict. Like I said, it could have been about a business executive with Wall Street and Enron, coming up against big things, but it's not. It's about an evangelist who stands uncompromising, kind of like Braveheart, against this tyrannical government. And in that, you're dealing with a great deal of conflict, which is why you attract actors like James Remar or Bruce Davison and some other people who are really interested in the cinematic elements. A lot of people have watched this a Hollywood Reporter, I remember talking with them after watching it, and they said, you know, this really stands alone as kind of a Hitchcockian thriller as well as the message element of it. But I think a lot of people might be, well, some people at least are in the audience thinking, well, that's great, you know, but audiences are going to have a challenging time accepting a thriller as a faith-based movie. And I think that's one of our biggest, you know, is receiving that kind of support, and for them to see that it is a classic movie, it's worth seeing, and it has some of these high themes of values that are critical to us. And so we definitely have challenges, I think, ahead in the release of this film, and these other movies have certainly helped in that process. One thing that I don't think a lot of people know, they go, well, persecution, we see this on our Facebook page. We've got 585,000 fans on our Facebook page, and I go and I read these message feeds of people, and a lot of them say, how could persecution ever come to America? And there's no persecution. Christians are the ones persecuting other people, and I understand that perspective, but Christians, by statistics, even by far left-wing polls, are still the most persecuted people group in the world. Maybe not here in America in terms of hard persecution and burning people at the stake, but overseas, like, for example, Pastor Saeed Abedini in Iran, he's in prison, he's been taken back, he's being used as collateral in the nuclear situation. A lot of people have said that are very close to him by speculation. But we did a fundraising screening for Nagma Abedini, his wife, and we sold that place out, and we couldn't have had enough support giving money to help Nagma Abedini, whose husband's in prison in Iran, to buy a house, and they've raised over like $185,000 for this family to help get a house, and that's happening. That's just one example of what's happening elsewhere, right. And I think adds to the time.
But I think a lot of people in America can tell not stories that are that stark, but right. Other persecuted stories with regard to being a Christian. So the movie is very relevant with regard to 2014. I just want to open it up real quick in case anyone does have a question. And I can't see that well through the lights, so put your hand up high if you do. Woman. Yes, right here.
How are you going to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve just with little independent films?
That's the reason we're all in this room, is the challenge and the process of getting here. That's a huge question. Could there possibly be a studio?
He's got the answer.
I think it's Gray. Gray's the answer.
It's about money. This is a business. If they start making money with these movies, every studio in town will be on top of them. That's
isn't that
simple
why
as that.
But that's why we've seen a surge in these movies in the last,
Well, the term faith-based to me is an interesting one because it's a hard place to draw a line. I'm not sure we ought to draw it quite like we're drawing it now. I notice that people are using the term faith-friendly a little more than they have been in the past, but it looks to me like that you don't need what I call the magic words in order for it to be faith-based. On the other hand, you can have those words and it not be faith-based. I think it has to do with something broader, something having to do with religion, something having to do with a message. It's not the words themselves, it's the message that's being conveyed by the film as a whole. Back during the Watergate days, Gray, you and I are probably the only one who's in here that remember Watergate.
I remember.
Senator Sam Ervin, North Carolina, he had a lot of good old country boy sayings. He's a Harvard-educated lawyer, but he was still a good old country boy. And he said, you know, if you can draw a real good picture of a cow, you don't need to write the word cow under it.
That's great.
Everybody knows what it is, and I think if I had to answer the question, I don't have an answer either. I'd say be a good storyteller. Be a good storyteller.
That's right.
Draw a message, and you don't have to be so literal about everything.
And
I think Daniel's one of those guys.
Well, for me, then that was one of the goals going in. And I don't want to say, oh, I've achieved this, and you know, we're so groundbreaking, because I think there's probably just as many people are better what they do than I am. But one thing that was really important to me was that you, again, if you're going to have conflict in your story, and what I see happening a lot is that it's just like the faith-based movies are just one beam of bright white light, and you don't have a battle between light and darkness, and you've got to have an equal amount of force going against each other, and ultimately, I think, let the audience make a decision as for which they choose, the light or the darkness. But what I see is it generally being forced down the throat and not choosing. If you read the Bible, there's a great opposition between light and darkness through the entire Bible, and God has left it to us to decide what we make of it. But why is it that when we make a movie, we feel like we get so scared about the darkness that the people are going to choose the darkness?
Right.
And I think that's a huge challenge, and audiences are just tired of being force-fed.
Mm-hmm. Great point. And unfortunately, on that note, we have to wrap up our great discussion that we had today. Many thanks to everyone on the panel, and we all hope that you will go out and watch Persecuted. It premieres on July 18th. Thank you so much.